Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman History Month. I am Sid Part 2, and I'm joined today by Mr. Steve Baxey as we continue the month in which we discuss the contributions that Geeky Gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by a biased educational system, except not at all. Steve, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about the 1998 reboot / remake / adaptation of Zorro called The Mask of Zorro, directed by someone who's very popular within the genre, Martin Campbell, written by a host of people, but most importantly starring Antonio Banderas, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Anthony Hopkins.
I still, it's so funny to think back on the fact that we had a Zorro film where Anthony Hopkins played Zorro.
You know, I am glad ultimately that Anthony Hopkins is Zorro in this, because originally Sean Connery was cast and he dropped out for whatever reason. But that would have been the second time Sean Connery pretended to be a Spaniard.
In a Zorro movie? I did not know that.
The most Scottish man on the planet pretending to have a Spanish accent twice would have been too much.
Oh, man. No, I did that 10 years ago when I was a flamboyant Spaniard, and it was, you gotta give those kind of roles to other people. I made my iconic debut, and I figured it was someone else's turn.
It's really funny because I was just scrolling through the Wikipedia on it, and they're like, should we cast this very famous Latin Puerto Rican actor named Raúl Rafael Carlos Arquela or Sean Connery? No, let's do Sean Connery. That sounds right.
I mean, and it's funny because there is that knee-jerk reaction where, is this racist kind of thing, and it's not, because Diego de la Vega is Spanish, which is not brown, or at least not always brown, I guess I should say. So I think it works. You could maybe make an argument that he's kind of doing a little bit of a brown face, but I think that's just tan as well. So I think it all evens out in the wash, and I think it is at least useful, if nothing else, that while he is Zorro in this film, he is not the lead Zorro of this film.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is I think
Zorro.
It would have been more egregious, in my opinion, if the Zorro of the movie and Catherine Zeta-Jones' character were the white people, as opposed to the old Zorro who's not in it a ton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it kind of works. I don't know. I was watching this movie, and it's been a couple years since I rewatched this. Let me just tell one funny story real quick. So I'm like, okay, yeah, let's watch this. And I'm looking to see what streaming services it's on, and I couldn't find it at first because I forgot to check Netflix. And I'm like, oh wait, why am I looking on streaming services? I own this. So I go upstairs to my DVD collection. Let me just look over here. So, Zorro DVD collection. I have The Legend of Zorro, the sequel to this film. I have The Mark of Zorro, the 1940s Tyrone Power film. I've got Zorro Rides Again and Zorro's Black Whip, two serials that are pretty bad, and I've not bothered to watch them. I've got the 1990s New World Zorro television series, all on DVD. I've got a 1970s Zorro film that I've not bothered to watch because I think it's terrible, but I saw it at the store and I was like, oh, Zorro's on it, so okay, I'll buy that for like $2. And I've got like a Zorro audio drama, and I think I might be missing one. I feel like I've got another Zorro thing in there somewhere. But I don't have this, and this is my favorite Zorro movie.
That's really strange. You think this is the one you would also see the most often when you're going out to buy movies?
Yeah, I mean, this was pretty popular.
This was huge, yeah, back in the day. I remember kids dressed up as Zorro for Halloween, both when this movie came out and when Legends came out, and you've never seen that since.
Yeah. No, pretty much. So I don't know. It's just that was mildly amusing to me that I didn't actually own this. So I ended up watching it on Netflix, which is fine. But yeah, like this is kind of like the Zorro movie. I think it is the best Zorro movie because it just gets the most right. Like it is fun, swashbuckling action. It's got a great, like, intricately woven plot. It's got just some absolutely terrific sequences and pacing. Like, this movie's a little over 2 hours, and it really does not feel like it when you're watching it. It's just got banger scene after banger scene, you know?
Oh yeah, this movie is absolutely incredible. It's so good. I always forget how entertaining it is to watch it, but it's so good. It's legitimately one of the best superhero movies of all time.
It is. It's certainly the best superhero movie of the 90s. Out of shadow of a doubt.
The most interesting thing about it for me is watching it and looking at some of the gags and the set pieces and the actors and stuff. For a lot of people, they'll be like, superhero movies in the modern sense got started with Superman and Batman in 78 and 89. And while that's kind of true insofar as they're the first like big budget superhero movies, I feel like The Mask of Zorro invented the modern superhero movie. The jokes with the horse and where he's playing with when he's fighting a Don Diego with the sword and gets knocked out of his hand, the stuff where he's like fighting up all of the random guards inside of the place where the horse is, all the weird one-liners and stuff, all of that feels like a very modern, quippy kind of Marvel movie. It's paced like that. The runtime's comparable to that. Even just like the old mentor training the new guy who's snarkier than he was. Like there's so much about this that just feels like this is the blueprint for every superhero movie we've made since, even though we don't treat it like that.
That's an interesting point. I've never really thought about it in that way. I suppose you've got an argument there. I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain if there's something else, because Spider-Man
Ant-Man's literally just this movie.
Yeah, except not good.
Well, yeah, no, except not good. But like, could you imagine, like, if you wanted to remake this movie, not that you should, but if you wanted to remake this movie, I really don't think it would feel very different. It would not be as good, obviously, but tonally and structurally, it'd be almost identical.
You'd get people watching this and be like, Ant-Man, or I can't believe they ripped off Ant-Man for the new Zorro movie.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, it's the same kind of setup, which is really interesting. I didn't think about that going into it. And Martin Campbell is a really interesting director for this, because this is not the first time he's rebooted a classic property, because the movie right before this that he did was GoldenEye. And Bond was dead for a few years in between Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton, and there's lots of rights issues that caused production of those movies to staggerly delay. So when GoldenEye came out, it was like a big revamp, reboot kind of situation, even though it's in the same lineage. And so he directed that, and that was really popular. And then he did Mask of Zorro, but then he did the exact same reboot shit again because he made Casino Royale. So like this guy is very, very good at taking properties that have not done well for a little while and completely rebooting them and making them interesting and setting a modern tone. Because you could argue GoldenEye is the blueprint for modern James Bond movies up until he breaks the formula and does Casino Royale again. And then Zorro is the blueprint for modern superhero movies until we eventually turn a corner with those. But you could also say Casino Royale is the blueprint for modern reboots in general, too. And he directed that one.
You know what's funny is I didn't know he was the Bond director. The thing I know Martin Campbell for outside of Zorro is Green Lantern, which is pretty funny, because that's the flop of his career, right?
It's because it wasn't a reboot.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, so like it's funny because I didn't know he was the Bond director, and it's so funny that he just straight up was like, "No, I'm just gonna steal something from the Bond franchise." And start the movie with fucking Zorro walking out of like abstract background and just fucking do the cut for the Z, because that shit goes so fucking.
That's so good. I love that so much. I love that it begins and ends. Hype.
It's so fucking hype, and it's got like the fucking Jaguar sound in there for some reason.
It's so it just makes it look so fucking cool though. I love it so much.
Yeah, that movie's so fucking.
Like, no, fuck Batman running up with the bat signal behind him and slicing your face with a Z. That's where it's at.
Yeah, no, man. It was funny though watching it through this time because again, it's been a couple years since I watched it, and I've got like the new woke audience in mind thing, and I was sitting here trying to like suss out what would the modern audiences have a problem with, and like. Most of it, I think, the Anthony Hopkins thing, I think, would be something of debate, but I don't think it would be out and right called, like, bad. I got to the like, hottest fucking scene in this movie where, Banderas and Catherine Zeta-Jones have their sword fight.
Oh,
and
God, that's so
holy
good.
shit, it would so not fly today. It's so fucking funny
That's
to
because
watch it.
people are wrong, because it's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
That sequence is so unbelievably horny.
It's so fucking horny and just like cool as shit. It's a great fucking sword fight. And it, just the fact that it ends with like him stripping her and stuff, like, oh my god, and like all like fucking you realize, Steve, that people bitch about one like spur of the moment kiss in fucking Avatar, right? And then there's like Zorro fucking non-consensually kissed the female lead in Mask of Zorro, and that's what makes this a bad movie.
This is why modern audiences need to go touch grass, because she is into it and it is really fucking horny.
Yeah,
all
that
right
whole
out there.
sequence was the funniest shit to me. I was like sitting
I
there
love
like,
it.
no, you cannot get away with this with a modern audience. They'd get so pissed.
That's maybe the one thing about this movie that doesn't translate to the modern superhero movies that are very influenced by it, which is modern superhero movies are nowhere near this horny. And they should be, but they're not.
Yeah, no, this is... You're definitely right on that. This has a lot more, like, just balls to it. Because, like, the scene where they're dancing together, too, holy shit. I mean, and it's fucking Catherine Zeta-Jones and Antonio Banderas. Like, I'm not bisexual, but, like, literally, since high school, my joke, quote-unquote joke, was, oh yeah, fucking give it all up for Antonio Banderas. No, like, really? Are you kidding me? Absolutely. And then fucking him and Catherine Zeta-Jones as the leads in this? Holy shit.
It's such a well cast movie between not just the three of them, but every like unbelievably horny, or also just unbelievably cartoonishly evil, and they're all playing it so straight. Like the dad, Don Raphael, when the outrage on his fucking face when he sees his daughter dance on stage like that, and then the real quick-witted shift that Antonio Banderas has, where he calls her spirited, and she huffs away. That's so fucking good.
Yeah, no, that's all great. I love... It's interesting because I think, like, if I do have a criticism of the pacing of this movie is it all starts really strong for about the first 30 to 40 minutes, and then Zorro takes a backseat for a very long period. And that's where you're getting, like, all the scenes with Alejandro, like, doing the Diego fop kind of thing, right? And I do think that's, like, it maybe outstays its welcome a little bit. Like, I like a lot of what's going on, but it does kind of drag maybe just a tiny bit. But then again, there's so many good scenes that you get because of that I don't know I'd necessarily say that. It's just that does occur to me.
I don't know if they drag for me. My big problem with is I think the mantle of Zorro and the idea of Zorro that they're trying to argue for doesn't really come through by the end. Because you have the great scene where Anthony Hopkins meets Alejandro in the bar when he's like getting ready to kill the captain because he's so angry about his brother dying, and he's like, I can train you to be better at this, and so he starts doing it, and you get that great training montage. There's like no room to breathe or no beat or like no moment where he goes from, okay, I've trained and now I'm going to be Zorro. He just kind of puts a mask on and it just immediately cuts to, okay, now I'm going to start doing Zorro antics even if I'm not good at them. And then Anthony Hopkins has that speech to him after the horse fiasco where he's like he hasn't completely understood what Zorro is supposed to mean. But I don't feel like they adequately like set up his intention of wanting to be Zorro outside of just being trained by Zorro. And then by the end, they make that choice in the script to have him take off his mask so that the captain can see that he's the brother that survived, and that he keeps the mask off so that Elena can see that it's Alejandro under the mask the whole time. But when he's freeing the people from the cages, he should have that mask on. Because the idea is supposed to be Zorro is there to protect the people. He's there to be what the people want. Everyone in the movie engages with Zorro because they recognize him. They don't care that it's a different man under the mask. But that never really comes through. It's not a major problem, but it does kind of kneecap what the movie's supposed to be about.
No, I definitely agree with you there. That I think the scene of him and her walking out of the explosion and the smoke and like carrying the kids and there's all the people that they saved, and he doesn't have the mask or the hat on in that moment. It's like it hurts it a little bit, right?
It does, yeah.
Like that's a bit of a problem. I also don't like that both Diego and Alejandro like think of the people second, as opposed to the fights that they're in the middle of doing.
Yeah, no, when they're like, hey, Elena, you go save the people. We got personal beef to deal with.
Well, like it's an interesting problem because it comes from what is in any other like argument a really, really sound structure, which is this is not just them with their personal beef. They need to stop these guys in order to save the people in the first place, right? Like, you can't just, like, come in and let the people out, because if you do that and these guys get away, they'll succeed, and then the people will be right back to being slaves or in danger, right? So, like, there is that level of the personal beef, and then that's topped onto, like, a very like important, this is a structural threat to the plot, and it's just what it all comes down to is it just feels kind of off that neither of them like are actively doing anything until literally in Alejandro's case the last possible second. So I think those are like, I wouldn't say like issues or like, you know, plot breaking problems, but they are definitely like, you could have tightened the screws here just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing the movie is really missing is that there's not a lot of Antonio Banderas as Zorro going through the streets and people recognizing him. Because there's the guy in the church, the priest or whatever, he sees him and he immediately helps Zorro. And then there's all the speechifying between Anthony Hopkins about Zorro and then Antonio Banderas to his kid. But you don't, outside of the opening scene with Anthony Hopkins in his heyday, there's no real, like, the people of this town believe in Zorro happening. And I feel like this movie does actually really need that, especially because it does such a good job, and this is part of why it didn't drag for me, but it does such a good job with the scenes where Banderas is pretending to be Don Alejandro and he's pretending to be like an aristocrat and in with the queen, and you can really tell. You can really tell the whole. Oh, I see why Batman was just a ripoff of Zorro, because the dual identity thing here is almost so much better than it's ever been in any Batman thing ever. But when he's pretending to be in with those people, it really plays for me, and it's really good. And I love the way Antonio Banderas moves between the I'm going to be quippy and funny and dismissive of the plights of the people, and then have a scowl on my face when I see something that is truly horrendous. All of that is so good, but then the counterweight of it, which is, okay, now this energy goes into Zorro, who is the real person, who's the real inspiration. That never really happens.
Yeah, they definitely... I feel like this is an issue of telling and not showing. Because, like, when the governor, like, lands back on the beach and he gives this whole speech about how no one's ever cared about the people of California. California's always been an afterthought or a problem in this, that, or the other. And he's like, no one's ever really cared for you. And someone just speaks up and says, Zorro did. Like, you get those moments, and you get that, again, early scene with Anthony Hopkins being Zorro proper, that establishes the idea of Zorro, and then I think the thing that the director, writer, whatever, is kind of counting on is this idea that you will take that and internalize Zorro from other media or ideas of Zorro that you have already. You know? So it's like the movie seems to be depending on the audience to fill in some of these blanks. Which isn't necessarily the best thing ever.
I think that's the right move to make with characters like Zorro that are old and abstract and have a lot of history to them. I think it's less compelling if there's not enough Zorro material out there to create like a cultural identity of people know Zorro, because you can get away with that with Batman. I don't think you can get away with that Zorro now, because it's been like no Zorro for like 20 years, and I don't know if you could have gotten away with it in 1998 either, to be honest with you, because there's a significant gap between the last Zorro thing and then this movie. Almost the same amount of gap as what we have now, basically.
Hold on, let me look something up.
I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, I know there's the 70s.
Zorro 1990. So the television series I have, 88 episodes, lasted from 90 to 93. So about 5 years Zorro on television. And then before that, I'm not sure. It's definitely not going to be the Guy Williams thing, because that was the 50s, and I know of at least 2 70s movies. Zorro the Gay Blade. Zorro the Gay Blade is 81, and then I think it's just Zorro 1975. Yeah, The Mark of Zorro 1974. I think... Didn't fucking Guy Williams come back for Son of Zorro, or is that just like a pilot or something?
I know Son of Zorro is a thing that lasted, but I thought that was older than the 90s.
I'm not saying 90s, but I'm just saying, like, as far as your gaps go, because the most recent thing to this I could think of is the 90s Zorro series from 90 to 93. So you're talking about a 5-year gap, and then before that, 9-year gap to get to Zorro and the Gay Blade, which in all fairness is a parody. Zorro and Son, CBS, Walt Disney Television. Yeah, and they actually did get Guy Williams back for this. So this was 83. Yeah, you got pretty good, like, peppering of Zorro stuff in there. I don't know. Oh wait, no.
Okay, alright, so maybe it plays better in the 90s. It doesn't, because now there's like effectively no Zorro since these movies came out.
Yeah, you get the next of the Banderas movies in 2005, if memory serves. That's a fucking stinker of a film, which is crazy because it's got everybody back, right? it plays like a direct-to-DVD sequel with like a different director and maybe like, like only Catherine Zeta-Jones returns or some shit. And no, it's got Martin Campbell, it's got Antonio Banderas, it's got Catherine Zeta-Jones, and it just does not function. There's one or two cool scenes, I'll give it that, where he fucking lands the horse on the train. It's pretty dope.
Martin Campbell, though, to be fair, is kind of a right because he's made, as far as I can count, 2 movies that are worth watching, and everything else kind of sucks. So that's not super surprising, because The Mask of Zorro is really good, and Casino Royale is really good, and then everything else, your mileage will vary.
Oh, you didn't like Goldeneye?
I don't like Goldeneye. No, I think Goldeneye's kind of shitty, to be honest with you.
Oh, damn! All right.
I don't think any of the Brosnan movies are good, to be honest. I think Tomorrow Never Dies is the closest to being the best of those 4, but I think all of them are bad.
Fair enough. I don't know. Like, I definitely would agree that, like, it's not the perfect Zorro film, but is easily my favorite.
Yeah.
Because I think the thing that this gets the best is the idea of Zorro and, like, kind of coming from the people. The fact that Alejandro is just, like, this bandit, this, street kid kind of thing. And then he rises up and becomes Zorro is really, really powerful. And this is the closest we've gotten to, like, a fully successful legacy Zorro. To the point where, this is Alejandro's movie, right? Like, Diego de la Vega as a character exists here, and he's important here. But by no stretch of the imagination is he the protagonist of this film. He is a supporting character. And so this is a legacy Zorro film, and then it gets a direct sequel continuing that legacy Zorro. And I think Zorro, just as a concept, as much as I like Diego de la Vega as a character, unfortunately a lot of his stuff has been ripped by Batman at this point. So I kind of think that Zorro as a franchise should be moving more in this direction, because it would be more original to make Zorro a legacy, like, handed off through the ages kind of character, and just let Diego be the first. I don't know.
I think, and I do want to talk about the Batman thing a little bit. We don't have to make it super long as part of this podcast, because it is about Zorro. He did literally come first. But I do want to talk about the Batman ripping off Zorro thing a little bit, because I'll disagree with you slightly and say, I think Batman did sufficiently rip off Diego de la Vega's unique qualities in Bruce Wayne and Batman for a very long time. But we've gotten so far away from those things about Batman that I really like, that now if Zorro did it, it would feel kind of original again. Because the thing that Batman stories, I think, are really missing, that Zorro has, and that the original Batman comics that were ripping off Zorro really had, is one, the dual identity thing was useful and it was interesting in its own right. You don't see a lot of modern Batman writers who ever care about writing Bruce Wayne whatsoever. Even in, like, The Batman, which is a movie I really like, that's a movie all about how he refuses to be Bruce Wayne. Tynion didn't write a single Bruce Wayne scene in his entire Batman run, which includes this Detective Comics run, which ran for like 30, 40 issues. Like, that man just outright refused to write Bruce Wayne. Chip Zdarsky so far has not written Bruce Wayne at all. What's-his-face? Joshua Williamson has not written Bruce Wayne at all. Like, we really don't do any of that stuff anymore. We don't do the fact that he has practical reasons for being Bruce Wayne. We don't do the charming, suave socialite thing anymore. We don't even really do the Batman draws power from the people of Gotham thing in the same way Zorro would draw power from his own community. Like, early Batman did that quite a bit, and then we toy with that a lot in the post-Morrison era with Snyder and Tom King. But it's more kind of just existential musing about Gotham City being alive in itself. It's not really like the people of Gotham have an interpretation of Batman that they're kind of banking on and hoping for in the same way they do with Zorro. So it's interesting how much of Batman is in Zorro and how much good Batman comes from just ripping off Zorro, and I love all that. But we do it so rarely now that if you just wanted to do a straight Zorro movie, people would not think it's a ripoff because it just doesn't come up anymore, ever. Like, when's the last time Bruce Wayne has really been Bruce Wayne outside of, like, that one dinner scene in Dark Knight?
No, I think that's fair. But it's just, I feel like if you were to do Zorro and Diego in that particular way on film again, it's going to just feel too much like you've seen it before, because you're right, it's been a while, but the move has been made. The public consciousness kind of is aware of this trope at this point. And again, I feel like Zorro as a character is just a stronger concept, probably more than any other character besides maybe Green Lantern, to just fully become a legacy character. With it, like, to do a Zorro series that is just about handing down the mantle to someone else. Like, how cool would it be if, like, I don't know, every 5-10 years, whatever, we got a Zorro film and they're all in the same franchise and they all are just the one guy training the next one, or handing off the cape and the mask to the next one. You know?
Honestly, you probably wouldn't even want to have him train the next guy. You really could have just do like and you just keep recasting and you just keep adding a different Zorro, and the next movie just like, and here's this guy's deal and why, and here's this guy's deal and why he's Zorro. You don't even want to get into like how further removed they are from the original Don Diego La Vega, or how connected or anything like that. You could just literally make it anthologies at that point.
Yeah, no, I think that'd all be fine. I just think it would be kind of like cool in a unique kind of way to literally do the passing the swords down kind of thing. And
yeah,
this movie, I feel,
right.
just makes the strongest argument for it in my mind.
I think you're right about Zorro having the in spades. He's definitely the kind of character where you could literally be anyone under the mask, and that's kind of the whole point, is that anyone that everyone can believe in is going to be Zorro. Anthony Hopkins even has that line where it's like there are plenty of people who would put on that mask. And it's fun in this movie in particular how everyone just kind of rolls with how pulpy and fun it is, where the burning red Z gets carved into the land when Zorro's about to break into Raphael's place. That's such a good shot. It's such a cool oh fuck moment. Then Antonio Banderas shows up, and Raphael just starts fighting him. He doesn't fucking care if this isn't Don Diego. He doesn't fucking have any questions about, wait, this guy is young. He just starts fighting him. And then later he's like, yeah, that probably wasn't the same guy, but he doesn't seem to fucking care.
It's fucking perfect. Like, there's so
so
much
straight
about this. Yeah, again, and I think that's kind of to the point of Zorro. This movie really plays with what Zorro is in the public consciousness, both within the way that it like asks the audience to do things, and in the way that characters don't seem to need like explanations for things. Just Zorro fucking Zorros. Like, you see a guy wearing a mask and running from the soldiers like that. No, he's not a bandit. He's not like a criminal. That's Zorro. He doesn't even have like a fucking black shirt on, and he's Zorro to the priest. It's fucking like, that priest probably helps every goddamn criminal. He's probably the worst priest ever when you get right down to it.
Or the best, depending on how you define it.
I don't know, man. It's just, there's something to it. This movie just goes so fucking hard. It's just like, Steve, I hesitate to think of a movie with just a better, like, it's not even the third act. It is like the entire last half of the movie is just sequence after sequence that's fucking amazing. Like, from the moment that fucking Z gets lit on fire, you just have so many fucking great scenes back to back to back. Ah, I fucking adore this movie for that.
It's a really well made, like, just traditional, trying at any point to, it's not trying to have like that sort of basic generic structure. It does not trying to be ironic in a way. It's just like, how do we keep adding the stakes up? And when you do that naturally, the whole last hour is going to kind of devolve into blood. So like you've got everything from him stealing the horse Tornado, up to him invading Don Rafael's palace and befriending him as Don Alejandro. All of that stuff, every scene is just building to the next one and building to the next one over and over and over again until you just get like action sequence after action sequence. You got the fantastic two-handed sword fight that he does for a second with them, and then he breaks out of that, and then they plan the robbery with the mines, and there's all of the shit going down with Don Diego and his daughter.
Wait, you skipped it. You skipped the fucking like banger moment where you set up like the idea of these circles, this circle is your world, and as you progress the circle will get smaller, and then he fucking ends up on the table and fights all the guys.
Oh, that's so good. That's such a cool action scene.
It's so fucking perfect.
The whole movie is just like it's balls to the wall fun, and it's really sincere about it, and all of the actors you can tell are putting in the work and having a really good time. So it's hard not to just be like, oh, that's so cool, and that's so cool, and that's so cool.
It is, and you know what? That's okay. It's such a good movie. It's like surprisingly like violent too. You're so used to like the Marvel movies where no character is allowed to bleed on screen. You know, fucking Tony Stark and Captain America jump through windows left and right in the fucking MCU and shit, and they never get a goddamn scratch on them. Whereas this movie's got like just some fucking brutality. Like even like right out the gate, he fucking cuts that Z into that dude's throat, and it is like blood on screen, and then just all the fighting and all the action is really visceral, and like it actually feels like there's impact and stuff. And then he gets some really good fucking brutal deaths. Like he stabs that captain at the end, and that dude doesn't like he doesn't like immediately fall off the sword and off camera to his death or anything. He is on screen like slowly dying for a good 2 minutes, and then another guy just gets dragged down to his death by a fucking runaway carriage and shit, right?
The
like
ongoing
on top of him.
The ongoing petty feud between Captain Love and Alejandro is so much fucking fun to watch every time they're on scene together. Because like you want to talk about brutality, you remember that scene where he tells him to come see him alone, and he's like, "Do you want a drink?" And he pulls out the fucking hand and the head of his brother, and then Alejandro just like walks out after he takes a sip of that fucking disgusting ass water. And in their final fight scene together, he carves that M into his face and lets him recognize who he is before he dies. It fucking goes hard, and it's so petty.
Yep. And he gets like some fucking banger lines too. Like that's one thing they kept movie to movie is they give Zorro like in that last fight, they give him a fucking like good banger line. So like in this one hits a little bit harder than the second one where it's like, just one question. What do you want? How do you want your remains? Like, it's fucking great. But then the other one has like the final fight. He cuts the Z into the guy's clothes, so like there's a little less blood in that one. But he cuts the Z into the guy's clothes, and then he looks at him and says, "So the devil knows who sent you." And I'm like, The movie's not good, but there's some hype moments.
There's just so much good dialogue in this movie. The shit lines too. Like I love most of what Anthony Hopkins says. He's got that great line where he's like, "A nobleman's a man who says one thing and thinks another," or something like that, which is really fun. But also just like the one-liners and quips in this are really good. Like when she goes into the confessional and she's like, "I broke the Fourth Amendment," and he's like, "You killed someone?" And like this is what I mean by like this being like the blue. That's totally a line you would hear in a Marvel movie now.
Yeah, but like the thing is, it's because it's so like unexpected in the type of movie this is, it feels so fresh, you know?
Well, it's because we haven't done that before. It's because we didn't do these kinds of pulpy action movies plus quippiness with big, larger than life 90s set pieces before. Like, it was such a perfect marriage of all of those things. And when you throw the budget up and Americanize it, you eventually. But this is really the first time any of that's like come together in this way, shape, or form. Like, you could trace quippy dialogue to other action movies. You could trace costume characters to other movies, and you could trace balls to the wall 90s action scenes to other movies. But like, this is, I think this is literally like the first time where all of those were in this thing together. And there are some other movies that kind of like sporadically go through this same era, like Blade and Blade 2. Like, you could say that's also part of this. But the Blade movies are even like, they're so much darker and a lot more somber, and they can be quippy, but they don't have the kind of thing where you can reverse engineer it and make big popcorn PG-13 movies the way this feels. Like, this really feels like someone broke ground making this movie, and you'd be hard pressed to find a modern superhero movie that doesn't look like this movie.
Yeah, there's a world of difference between how do you want your remains stored and some motherfuckers always trying to ice skate uphill.
Whatever the fuck that means.
It sounds cool. That's all that matters.
One of my favorite, quick aside, to this day, I think one of the greatest superhero scenes of all time is Blade 2, where he gets out of the tank and just starts beating the shit out of all of the guards and then cuts Ron Perlman in half. Mm-hmm. So fucking good.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Blade's an interesting one in that like timeline of superhero movies. I guess I didn't really think of this. You know, I've always thought of this as a superhero movie, as a 90s superhero movie. But you are right, like, because 89 kind of is the beginning of a lot of the modern superhero films. And you get this like progression through the Batman films where they get a little more campy and stuff, and obviously Forever and Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin's 97, yeah?
Yeah, 1997. No, wait, I thought that was 1998. Wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure it's 97. Because Forever's 95.
You might. Yeah, you're right. It's 1990.
Okay. Yeah, well, like you get through those, and they get a little bit more like quippy and like silly and goofy and stuff. But I guess you're right. This does feel like the first superhero movie that kind of creates the formula that everything else follows after. I'd always kind of attributed it to Spider-Man, the Spider-Man films,
but you know, that's the interesting thing too, right? Is during this and after this. But like, when I think about the movies we've been making for the last 15 years, it feels like this is the one that most clearly connects, because Batman Forever and Batman and Robin have way more in common with Adam West on a budget than they do an MCU movie, which is not saying anything about anything. But they are literally just an Adam West movie with a massive amount of money behind it. Which, I mean, to be fair, the 66 Batman show had a big budget for its time, but it scales towards Batman and Robin at some point. Batman Returns and Batman 89 are Tim Burton movies before their superhero movies, really, except for the first one, except for like very minor sequences in the first one. The Reeves Superman movies are way out there in terms of like trying to do weird sci-fi pulpy things with Superman. They have the majesty to them that the first one kind of grandfathers into the rest, but all of those also feel more like just old school pulp movies. And then Spider-Man with Sam Raimi, there's definitely a lot of like modernizing storytelling because it was the 2000s at that point that movie has. But that guy is making a movie that is both modern storytelling meets homage to the 60s Spider-Man comics that isn't something that we copied later. Like, that movie doesn't have the same sense of like escalating stakes the way modern movies do. it's way more just individually scene by scene character drama driven with a couple action scenes sprinkled throughout, but it doesn't build the same way with the same kind of forward momentum a lot of these scripts are kind of engineered to do. And Zorro, it really feels like is the one that sat down and said, we're going to take the superhero costume, we're going to take the superhero origin, we're going to take the bombastic action scenes in a budget, and we're going to take the pulp cliffhanger style of every 5 to 10 minutes there's a scene that ends on a cliffhanger that leads you into the next scene, and we're going to mix it all together. Not any one of those things, but all of those things. And that's just kind of how we make modern superhero movies now, really.
Now you make a strong argument. It's really bizarre to think about this as the blueprint, but you're probably right.
No, this is Iron Man before Iron Man, really.
That's so weird.
Right?
And I guess it's just like a testament to how well the idea works, how well the structure works, and kind of why it's become the formula. And it's not. It's like that thing of, just because it's formulaic, it isn't bad, but something can be too formulaic. This just has the advantage of, well, it set the formula. You know, it didn't like over rely on it. It created it. Like everything about this worked, and so that's why they went and ran off with it. And it's real interesting to kind of talk about that in the context of its sequel, which we've kind of danced around. It's not very good. Lots of, like, this one did a lot of, I think, basically ahead of its time-ish. I mean, it was only 98, so 2 years ahead of its time, but ahead of its time, like, techniques and ideas for storytelling, and kind of pushed forward, whereas the sequel feels much more like a 90s film, to the point where it has, like, even, like, your 90s, you know, crotch shot reactions and shit. So it's interesting how that all kind of works out.
I wonder, I don't know if you know the history of the person. I wonder why there were so many years between this and Legend. Because this was really successful. This was a popular movie when it came out.
I'm kind of sad about Legend, because a couple years ago when I was on my big Zorro kicks, this has been like 2015, 7 years ago.
It's so fucking long ago, goddammit.
I know, right? I was on a big Zorro kick, and I decided to rewatch this, and I fucking love this movie. And I look at Haley, and I'm like, can you believe they never made a sequel to this? And she goes, what are you talking about? They made a sequel? I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, I've got it. And she pulls out the Legend of Zorro DVD, and I'm like, what the fuck? I've never seen this. And I think I was happier before I watched it. I think I was much happier in my ignorance of, man, I can't believe they never made a sequel to The Mask of Zorro. This is some bullshit. This movie was perfect. It deserved a sequel. I can't believe they never did. Meanwhile, it's just sitting there.
Honestly, I feel like you might have been The Legend of Zorro was a thing for the rest of your life.
I probably would have been a much happier man. But here we are. Here we are. I don't know, it's a very funny thing.
So I am curious, because we are in History Month, and I obviously, I mean, this is it's a period piece set in like the early 1840s-ish. I'm curious in the context of History Month how you feel about this movie. Because Zorro is a character that is defined by a very specific historical setting in a way that a lot of other characters like this and of his era kind of aren't. Like with the exception of like really Robin Hood, there's not a lot of like old school swashbuckling pulpy heroes that need to stay in the time frame that they were created for. But Zorro feels like he really belongs in the mid 1800s. Everything that's going on with Mexico, everything that happened before the war with America, all the politics with France and Spain that play into it, Like all of that stuff, I feel like is kind of baked into the character in the same way World War II is with Captain America.
Mm-hmm.
I would worry if we like kept changing the identity. What a Zorro would look like in like 1920, or like
See, I think it
something
works.
like that.
I think it works as long as you keep the idea of fighting oppression. That's like the main thing. Zorro is a symbol of hope against oppression, and kind of always has been. Like it's rare that a character is conceived and remains so like unchanged so long after the fact. But Zorro definitely is one of those characters, because like Batman changes drastically from original creation to even like 10 years later. Batman has gone through
Well, it's not even really
changes.
10 years. Like he loses the original copy 6 issues.
Yeah, no, like massive changes. Whereas Zorro's kind of complete on reception. As far as how this fits within a historical era, I feel like the biggest thing that ties Zorro to needing to, or like, not needing to be, but so often being like seemingly trapped in this time in history, is the fact that his weapon is a sword. Zorro needs a sword. And, you know, for better or worse, he's kind of like, you know, he's at the very end of when you could, like, believably get away with only carrying a sword, right? It's just...
He's very lucky the guns work the way they do back then.
Well, like, that's the thing with this, right? Is Anthony Hopkins as Zorro in this is dealing with still, like, essentially musket fire. They're not, like, proper muskets. They are technically rifles in this point in history, but they still are very cumbersome and very slow to load. And the technology that would make, you know, quick repeating rifles or easily reloadable rifles was not even like on the way. It was fully existing and like widespread. It's just Spain was really far behind the curve in technology and kind of always was. So it's just there's like that aspect of it. But then Alejandro as Zorro, he's got like a 20-year gap, and they, like, technology-wise, they show that people have like proper rifles and that they are actually able to more rapidly fire, and that's kind of what makes Colonel Love so dangerous in the very beginning is he's got a revolver and he's got a repeating rifle, and that's like scary.
Yeah.
And the thing, like, but it just challenges him to a sword fight, and that's what ends up saving Zorro's neck in it, kind of.
Well, and what's his face? Diego Anthony Hopkins dies after he gets shot, basically.
Yeah, and that's what gets him like weakened and stuff in the fight early on in the movie is he gets shot. And that's always like the harder thing for Zorro to deal with is just he's a character with a sword, so what do? And the answer obviously is lightsaber, but...
Oh, 100%, yeah. He just needs a lightsaber and like a motorcycle. Fine.
Yeah,
Fine.
We're not here to talk about Zorro Generation Z, though. That's a terrible show.
No, I mean, there's something really interesting about how we did a lot of Zorro adaptations that tried to essentially stick into the same time period. And, you know, you're right, there's like Generation Z. There's like these random ones throughout where we kind of throw them into a different time setting. But you do kind of always return back to this same little era. And it's interesting how that functions in this movie because you do have all of the politics with Santa Anna that they talk about and needing to fund the Mexican-American War and the stuff with Raphael losing favor with the Queen because of what's been going on with Mexico and California. Like, it's a really interesting period to be in. And it's a really interesting period where all of the stuff, like the iconography of Black Horse and the hat and the sword and the cape and everything, and how his various items and stuff reflect the culture that he is a part of and the thing that he's resisting. That he's got the very sort of posh aristocratic costume on one side and the more sort of like Mexican folk hero on the other side. That he uses a sword while everyone else is using muskets and guns and stuff like that. Like there's a lot to him that we've always grounded in this era, and I think this movie does a really good job of selling that without ever feeling like it's relying on anachronisms to move the rest of the plot along. One of the things about the second Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movie that I really like is that it's basically the origin story to World War One, as if more positive, which is really funny. And this is very similar to that, and it's got that sort of action movieism to it. But Zorro in that context, I feel like is just an idea you can't really beat. Because, yeah, Mexico's got a rich and complicated history through most of the 20th century and the 21st century, but I just don't think it's as interesting as this, really.
I don't know. I think there's a strong argument for Zorro continuing. One of the pitches I really liked that I heard years ago was do Zorro in World War II and have him fighting, or not even World War II proper, but the Spanish Civil War. That led to Franco in power. I think that would be a remarkably interesting Zorro, because you can have him fighting Nazis when there's like no D-Day on the horizon kind of thing, you know? And that takes him out of the West even, but it could be just inherently interesting. Also just the idea of Zorro kind of rising either with the rise of cartels and gang violence, or if you want to keep it like Zorro against authority, you could still do that with the gangs and police corruption, but Zorro, particularly against authority, I think could be really interesting to have him in the 60s and dealing with a lot of police corruption and kind of the hippie movement and stuff like that. I think could be really interesting.
I guess my hesitation with a lot of that stuff is I think we find ourselves when superheroes face more dramatic challenges and we keep escalating the risk. The character has to kind of embody something bigger than just a person in order to conceivably take on that risk. Like, Batman's just a dude, except he's also just the greatest dude of all time. Everything, and that you know that Batman Begins speech of like he's just a man, flesh and blood, he can be destroyed, but as a symbol he can be everlasting. And then you got like the Morrison stuff making that the most literal thing you possibly can by him leading the bat that inspired him to be Batman in the first place to crash through his window. Like, you at a certain point you can go really big and it goes hard, but after a while I feel like it gets too big for your britches, and it's just too much. Like, it feels too much like the fiction is in service to the abstract and it's not in service to the concrete setting that it's in. Because Batman as an idea is really compelling to talk about with respect to the story, but Batman as an idea being the story after a while gets kind of boring. But that's really the only thing you can do if he keeps fighting things that are also just big abstract ideas like fucking Darkseid. And Zorro kind of has a similar thing where he's so grounded in a community and a setting that the people there believe in him, that they believe in the myth of Zorro, that he can fight 100 men on his own. And there's a lot of drama to him being just a man in this context, doing what he can to help people and seeing the way people are living and the oppression around him, and only being able to fight back so much. But that's inspiring and interesting on its own, to where the more you push throughout history, the more Zorro has to just be way bigger than I feel like he needs to. Because after a while, I feel like you are just kind of, you do kind of just get to the point where, okay, he just has to be Batman. He just has to be infinitely wealthy with infinite time and infinite gadgets and infinite resources. And that it's harder to believe that as being a community-grown hero when you get past a certain point. Because I don't think you would have
I disagree with that. Because I think the thing that's important, and my idea of a legacy Zorro, is to keep the inspiration that Zorro creates as like the core founding part of it. Because just the idea of like Zorro stands as this test of like this fucking urban legend kind of thing that's like, oh yes, and there's this mythic outlaw named Zorro who fought for the people, and then someone just hears that and sees the oppression of their time and decides to take up the mantle and fucking carve a Z into someone's face. Like, that's just fucking... I think that's, in and of itself, that is all you need. I don't think you need it to be infinite time, infinite resources, richer and richer people. No, I think the thing that makes it strong, that makes it a good idea is that Zorro comes from nothing and is looking to... and looks like he comes from nothing. My favorite Zorro thing is the Matt Wagner run. And there's a really cool breakdown in the art and background books, or art and the stuff in the background of those books, where they break down Zorro's outfit, and, like, importantly, there's, like, this detail that says, a black cloak, dash, no lining. Lining a cloak is a symbol of status and wealth. This needs to look like any peasant could have thrown this outfit on and gone to attack the monarchy. And, like, that is so important to the character.
Mm-hmm.
Even more so than Batman. Because, like, there's that idea with Batman that, like, oh, maybe it's a bunch of guys. But it's like, no, it's too much. Like, he's got a fucking rocket ship and helicopter and all this stuff. Zorro's got a horse and a sword. And that's it. A horse, a sword, and a mask. That's kind of all they need.
That's what I like about it, is you can't maintain that based on various historical settings. Like, after a certain point, I don't know if you could really do that.
I disagree with that. I think you can, like, again, just the idea of the hero coming up directly from the streets, I think, has a lot of potential to it. Because, again, you need very, very little. You need, like, the sword, which you're going to have to work a little bit harder to justify, but given the iconography of Zorro and the cutting thing, I don't think you're going to have to work that hard to justify that. It's like, all right, if I'm going to be Zorro, I'm not going to be just some, like, fucking vigilante on the streets. I'm going to be Zorro. I'm going to use a sword, is the thing. And so what am I going to... I'm going to fucking train. I'm going to get good with the sword. I don't know. You're stepping on a fundamental belief I have about the character of Zorro, so I don't think you're going to convince me that Zorro has to stay in the early 1800s. I'm sorry, Steve. I think you're wrong.
No, that's fine. I'm not saying I'm trying to convince you. I feel like... And you said it right there, right? Like, you literally said the thing that I would... is, okay, you have to work harder to make us believe that he can do it with a sword. So he has to train really hard with a sword. And that's the slippery slope I worry about. Is like, the more work you have to do to make the concept believable based on the context, eventually leads to a version of it that I feel like is just less grounded in that comes from the people mentality that makes it so inspiring to me in the first place. Like, I think Zorro in this context feels so ripe and so natural. And the more you push him forward, the more work you have to do to make that work, as opposed to how naturally it works here. And I just think that's better.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that, because, like, even here, there's so much more that they're doing to kind of justify the return of Zorro, as it were. So I don't know. It's interesting to hear you say that, because initially it's just... Like, you should really watch the Guy Williams show, which just got put on Disney Plus, by the way. It's fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, because, like, the Guy Williams show starts, and he's on the boat, and he gets this letter from his father, and, like, decides to read it then. And it's just like, oh, son, I need you to return to California. The governor has begun to oppress the people, and so we must take up arms against him. He's like, my father's too old. He cannot fight. Then this will... And with the might of Spain behind the governor, the revolution is doomed. I must protect my father. I must protect the people from this tyranny. Bernardo, all my sword and fencing trophies, throw them overboard. I will become a man of letters. Like, he's just instantly the most charismatic and caring person in the world, which fucking Alejandro de la Vega is not. What's his fucking name? Morieta. Is not in this movie. He's a much more like cynical person, and he's becoming Zorro initially out of like a selfish desire, and there's like a whole arc for him. It's like, what do I do with this rage? How do I hold it back? And then the fucking mask comes down on screen. Like,
that's such a good scene. It's such a good moment.
But like that's to my point is this movie's doing more work to make you believe that someone would want to be Zorro.
Well,
so as you get you get that very like almost Christopher Reeve-esque, no, of course I will be Zorro. It is the right thing to do, to the I've got to like find an outlet for my bottled up rage that is more healthy.
I mean, I don't think that's the same thing. I think
that's pretty close.
No, I don't. I think the magic of this movie is that it's playing everything straight. That it's everything about this movie is just, yeah, this works in this context, and we're not going to bother trying to think about it at all because it works in this context, and that's why it matters. You know, like the dude's terrible with a sword, and then he trains with Don Diego for a little while, and two-handing it. Then that's awesome, and that's fine. And trying to modernize it really, in this sense, just means how do we make it emotionally compelling, not how do we make it make sense. And I think that's my worry, is the more modernizing you do to make it make sense, as opposed to how much you do to make it emotionally work already, is what worries me. Because I think what makes Alejandro a really interesting protagonist is that he's not cut out to be the same charismatic Zorro that Diego is, but he wants to do something. And Zorro in this setting is that mantle, is that idea, is this is how you do something, this is how you make it work. You become Zorro because this is the way to get what you want, this is how you fight back. The more you shift from this is the character, this is what's emotionally fulfilling to the character, to okay, but he's just supernaturally good with the sword, which is why he doesn't get shot, is my problem.
I don't know. Again, you've got like the idea of theatrics and just scaring people or whatever that Batman has kind of introduced, and Zorro is just more making like the showmanship and stuff. And I think that's the other thing is Zorro as a character is just so much. Like, that's part of what makes him cool to me, is that like Batman is a recluse, and he is a guy who went around the world and is not afraid of anything and can dodge bullets, because he's just his body is perfect for every sport known to man, even though that doesn't make any fucking sense, because he's Batman. That's just the idea. The idea is he's good at everything, and Zorro's not, and that's what's cool about him. Yeah, see, I don't know. It's funny to me because like I can show you some Zorro shit that just fucking blow your mind. Like, the 90s show has one of the most, like, power-scaly Zorro moments of all time. Where, you know how, like, in your fucking, like, classic Gordon Batman scene where, like, Gordon's having a conversation with a police officer or who the fuck ever, and then, like, Batman just appears and, like, finishes the conversation. You know, just, like, comes out of nowhere and scares the shit out of everyone. With like the one-liner. So there's a fucking episode of the 90s Zorro film where, or not film, series, where the governor is like preparing to like flog someone in the middle of the public square. Like, everyone is gathered around about to watch this shit go down, right? And as the whip pulls back, you hear the crack, but then like the guy's hand goes forward and you're like, what? And there's just fucking Zorro, and he has stolen the whip out of the guy's hand using his own whip, sitting on his horse in the middle of the town square. Do you know how fucking hard it is to train a horse to be a ninja? Like, and everyone's surprised to see it. So, I don't know. I see where you're coming from. I see what you're saying. I think you've not consumed the right amount of Zorro media, which is to say all of it.
No, that's fair. I mean, I movies, the Matt Wagner stuff, and the original, not the original, but the 40s Mark of Zorro movie.
The Matt Wagner shit's so fucking good.
Matt Wagner is, in general, is just so fucking good. And it's great that he has one of my favorite ones on and he never made a crossover.
I don't. I think it's like a licensing thing. The company that owns the license to Zorro is like really fucking particular.
That's annoying.
The fact that we've gotten Batman in the Shadow but not Batman and Zorro is fucking bullshit. Because people have legit made their argument. Oh, the Shadow is so much more responsible for like what we know of as Batman than Zorro is. I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah, that's a weird thing to say. Like, Batman and the Shadow... Batman's a ripoff of the Shadow in the sense that it's dark and gritty and takes place in a city. And Batman, more directly as a concept, is a ripoff of Zorro, though. A socialite that pretends not to be a socialite so that he can, like, fight against injustice. He's more Zorro in that sense.
And wears all black. And
wears all
has
black. Early Batman's a lot more fun in that sense, and he is more in it for like, oh, there's been a murder? That's interesting. Let's go check it.
Has a sidekick that's also a butler.
Yeah,
like,
that's cool. Alfred was not Batman's butler for several decades, until several decades later, but yeah.
Yeah, well, they ripped it off again later. They went back and like, okay, what else can we steal from Zorro?
That's fair. That's fair.
Oh man, if I ever write a fucking Batman thing where he's at a party, I'm going to say, oh, then this is my friend Diego de la Vega. I'm just going to fucking do it.
That's the other thing about this movie that makes me really think it's cutesy ways it messes with Zorro's history to make it match for this movie. Because Alejandro is the name of Don Diego's dad in other Zorro stuff, but he's the new Zorro in this. And Bernardo is a butler who is mute, who Don Diego pretends to be in this movie. So like all of that like weird like little things like you get an Easter egg, that feels like a very modern.
Yeah, nah, you're not wrong. Though I think that you could just make the argument like, oh, well, we don't know if Diego had a Bernardo that just like died or some shit, you know?
No, sure, but like you could totally see, and I mean we did this with Jarvis too. We're like, sure, Tony Stark maybe had an old butler named Jarvis that he then just turned into a computer program. But calling his computer program Jarvis is so you wouldn't have to have Butler Jarvis from the comics. It's a very similar thing.
No, I agree. I agree completely. Yeah, it's cutesy stuff. I don't love that choice, by the way, about like kicking Bernardo out of this movie. Just because like it's kind of neat that Bernardo existed from 1919. Bernardo is in the very first Zorro story, and like he's even in the first Douglas Fairbanks film. Bernardo exists. And it's, again, from delivery, perfect. Right? Like, they never changed it, that Bernardo is mute, but pretends to also be deaf. They've never changed that. It fucking goes so hard. They even did it in the what's the name of the series? The CGI one. Legend of Zorro? No. Fuck, I can't remember the name of the new CGI show. But even that has Bernardo, and he's like much younger and like just as physically capable as Diego, to the point where they're like switching the costume on and off a bunch. But yeah, it's really, really funny.
I am excited that
Zorro the Chronicles. There we go.
I am excited that we're getting new Zorro stuff potentially soon, because that got announced finally.
Oh, what did?
A Zorro TV show for Amazon.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing about that. Yeah, that'll be cool. Apparently Tarantino like got really excited about the idea of adapting the Zorro Django comic.
God, that would be so fucking cool. It's such a good book.
Well, fucking like both Jamie Foxx and Tarantino seemed really excited about it for a hot minute there. So like maybe, legit maybe one day. I was reading an interview with Anthony Hopkins recently where he's like, "Yeah, I talked to Quentin Tarantino about maybe doing a Django Zorro film, which would be interesting because it's been so long. I'd basically be the Anthony Hopkins character." And then I'm like, "Yes, that is exactly what you would be."
Oh, that'd be really fucking cool. Oh man.
Yeah, it's funny as shit.
So actually, I just googled it. Apparently, they wrote a script for it, but the movie is dead.
Dead, or just like?
I mean, I assume in Hollywood, anytime there's a franchise dead, it's just in development hell. So this is probably just in development hell. But just based on an article that came out from the summer, there was a script for it, but it's not going to get made, or like it's not moving forward because it's too expensive.
No, Django Zorro crossover in the works, says writer Jerron. Yeah, probably not. I don't know. We'll see. It would fucking slap.
It would be really fucking hype. And I mean, you've got Jamie Foxx around. He's not doing anything else.
What's he gonna go do? Be Electro?
Right. Exactly. What's he have going for him?
Yeah.
But this is a really good movie. I really like this. I always how good it is until I sit down and.
It is like just an absolute fucking banger of a film. I need to get a like physical copy of this. This is just one of those movies where I'm like, no, I don't ever want I don't want to be at the mercy of some streaming service. We watched this with Leah, and she even like she's got kind of bored, and that was kind of what I noticed about those scenes with him being like the Don Alejandro. Is those kind of go on for a while, and you get a lot of like there's not like a lot of action sequences that grab your attention again for those. That's a lot where the meat and potatoes of the plot is happening, and I noticed that because Leah got bored during those parts of the movie, and then when shit started happening again, now she was paying attention. So I don't know, it was interesting.
I definitely can say this is one of those movies where it's got its slow bits, but I never personally felt bored watching it in the middle of it. Like it always felt like there was always like a quip, or there was always like a weird sort of tension happening, or there was always something about it that felt like it was like even stuff with like the dinner party, or the weird feud with the captain, or like learning about that weird fucked up plan to sell Santa Anna's money back to him. Like, I thought all of that was just fun to watch or interesting in its own right. So I never personally felt bored, but I can see what you mean, because there is a sort of like, if superhero movies have a problem of the third act has too much action, that's all building from the second, and they're kind of just loading exposition up front. This movie has the problem of it takes all of the exposition and just throws it in the middle arbitrarily. So I can understand that, but I thought it was all interesting enough, so I never got bored.
No, I didn't get bored. My 2-year-old got bored. There's a difference.
That's fair. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, that is the real judge.
Yeah. So I don't know. I love this fucking movie. It's fucking great fucking. Movie.
The other thing, which is nice, is it's a superhero movie you can watch with your kid. That's nice.
I mean, I think you can watch most of them with your kid, but I don't know.
I mean, you definitely can watch a good chunk of them with your kid. But then there's also the ones you think you should be able to watch with your kid that you probably can't, like Batman versus Superman.
Oh, okay. If you say so.
I mean, I don't know. Do you want to try showing Leah Batman?
No, but that's just because it's bad.
Well, that's also fair.
Leah's not going to understand what it means for someone to be branded. She's fine. She's not going to understand why that's a fucking stupid plot point.
She will be very inquisitive though when back. Do you?
Anyway.
Because it's a legit question. She doesn't know.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead and go into ratings then. I'll go first. I'll give this movie 5 out of 5 heads in a jar. Because I'm feeling
God,
hurt.
that's so creepy.
Yeah.
How is it okay to drink that water? That's
I
disgusting.
mean, it's the 1800s. You didn't drink water in the 1800s.
That was so disgusting, though. Ugh. But anyway, I'll give it 4 out of 5 ripping off Catherine Zeta-Jones's top.
Alrighty. Steve, I guess we need a discussion topic, or I guess, well, you've already done a review, so why don't you do a discussion topic for this month?
We'll still technically be in History Month, yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about... Let's talk about war movies. Just in general. Just the idea of war movies. Like World War II movies, Korea movies, all of them.
Alright, I'm down. I'm down to clown. Alrighty, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I love Zorro.
Me too.
And Catherine Zeta-Jones tits.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things like legit. There's scenes where she fucking walks in frame. I'm just like, God damn.
I know, honestly. So unfair. It's so unfair.